This week we're going to be looking at iteration. Iteration is part of programming. We've been looking at programming over the last few weeks. So as a quick recap, remember that programming is writing computer code. And we create that computer code in order to create a computer program, or to solve a particular problem. Algorithms are sequences of instructions. So imagine we've got a problem to solve. We create an algorithm with all of the instructions that we're going to need in order to be able to solve that problem. Algorithms, we can show those algorithms in two different ways. We can create a flowchart, which is a visual tool. We can look at that and we can follow the steps through in order to solve our problem. Or we can do what's called pseudocode, where we write out the code in a simplified English version of actual computer code. Those algorithms, if we work through our algorithms properly, we can then create all the steps that we are going to need in order to create that computer program. We can then take the algorithm, so take those steps and put them into a computer program, okay? And we can use programming languages like Python in order to create those programs that are then going to run on computers, on tablets, on mobile phones, smartphones, and so on. Last week we looked at selection. So if you remember, selection happens when the program needs to make a decision. It can go one of two ways. We use selection to make the program carry out different actions based on certain conditions. So we use these keywords: if, then, and else if. So if our program needs to make a decision, if something is true, then the program will do this. If it's not true, then do something else. And then we can have more than two options. So if we've got more than two options, say if we want to have three options, we can do if, then do something, then do something else, or else if, then do the third option. And we can use else ifs as many times as we want. So we can give the computer loads of different options. So if you imagine that you are playing FIFA, the player with the ball, he has a couple of different options, and you as the player have a couple of different options. So if you press a certain button, then pass the ball. Else if you press a different button, shoot the ball. Else if you press a different button, lob the ball. Selection gives the user of that computer program different options. This week we're going to look at what's called iteration. Sounds a complicated word, might not know what it means, but it's real simple. Iteration is just a process of looping or repeating certain instructions. Iteration allows us to repeat certain instructions. So rather than having to write out that instruction 10 different times or to type out that code 10 different times, we can just type it out once and then use iteration to loop that particular instruction. However many times we need to loop that instruction, however many times we need to repeat that instruction. It's going to save you time because you don't have to type out all that code or plan out all that code. And it also allows the computer program to have less instructions, which means it's going to run faster on a computer. Now, there are two types of iteration. There's count controlled, okay? So count controlled loops will repeat the same instruction a certain number of times. So you can set in your program to run this piece of code 10 times. It will then do that action 10 different times. Okay. Now the second type of iteration, the second type of loop, is what's called a condition controlled loop. Okay, and that will keep on looping around. It will keep on repeating until a certain condition is met. So imagine that we've made a little game. Okay, it's a very simple game. It's first to five. Okay, it's a penalty. It's you against the goalkeeper, and that process of you taking that penalty is going to loop around until 5 goals are scored. When you've scored those 5 goals, you've won the game. Okay, so with condition controlled loop, it will keep on looping around until a certain condition is met. So I mentioned this earlier. So why is iteration important? It allows us to simplify our algorithm. If it was having to create a flowchart, it would look really complicated. If we was having to write down every sequence, okay, every step where we want the program to repeat. Okay, so we can just draw a little arrow and it loops back around. Okay, so rather than having to to write down those steps again and again and again. You're going to get a really long algorithm. So say if we was asking for their username, put in your username, and they put it in wrong. Okay, so then we'd have to have the next step. Well, you put in the wrong username. Can you put your username in again? Or they put it wrong again. And we'd have a really long algorithm. Okay, with a loop, we can then say enter your username, and we've got a decision. If they've entered the correct username, move to the next step. If they didn't enter the correct username, then it will loop back to saying enter your username. That can then be translated into the code that we write, so we can make that simpler as well. So our algorithm and our code doesn't have to include loads of unnecessary steps. Now, just like last week when we looked at selection, iteration also uses some key words, and they are for and while. Let's explain those. So for a for loop, so like we've talked about earlier, count controlled, it's going to run the sequence for a certain amount of times. So 4 or 5 times, run this loop. Our other type of loop, as we've said, is condition controlled, and that's called a while loop. So it will run that sequence of instructions while something is not happening or while something is not true. Okay, so if we say a while loop, keep on running this sequence until the player has scored 10. So while the player's score is less than 10, it will keep on looping around. Once they've scored 10, it's met that condition, and it will stop that loop then. So what does that look like in Python? So let's take a look at this Python code. Now, many of you wouldn't have used Python before, so you're going to look at this and you're going to think, what is going on here? But let's break it down. So if we take the first line, total equals 0. So what they've done there is they've set up a variable, they've given it a name, so that variable is total, and it's given the value of 0. So now total is 0. The next line, it says for count in range 5. It says for, so we know that there is a loop, okay? It is a for loop, so it's going to be count controlled. So for count in range 5. That means it's going to count up to 5. So it's going to repeat a certain action 5 times. Now this bit is indented underneath, and this is the loop itself. So it's saying for 5 times, do these 2 things because they're indented. This line, it says number equals int, which stands for integer. So number is equal to integer, but then it also says input. So this is the user is going to input the number. And then it's this in speech marks here is what's going to appear on the user screen. So it's going to say type in a number. Okay, whatever they type in is then equal to number. So input, type in number. So say if they choose 2, they type in a 2, okay, 2 is then going to get stored as that number there. The next line, total. Remember here, we've set up our total and we've said the total is 0. So total equals total, which is this total, plus number. So what will happen here? The number that the person has typed in here, okay, will get added to the total. So total equals the total, which was 0, plus number, they've typed in 2, so it'd be 0 plus 2, and then that will get stored there. So now the total is 2. This is going to happen 5 times, don't forget. So that will be the first one, and the next one, okay, because it will loop around again. So it will then ask the user to type in a number again. So this time, maybe they type in 3. Now our total has changed. Our total is not 0 anymore because we previously just changed that to 2. So now total will be 2. They've typed in 3. So total equals total, which is 2, plus the number that they've just typed in, which is 3. So now the total will move to 5. And it will loop around 5 times. Then the next line, after it's done its 5 times, it will then say print the total is, and then the bottom one, so it will print the total is, and then on the next line, it will print whatever the total is there. Okay, so the total will get added up, those 5 numbers will get all added up, and it will print out the total there. That's how it works in Python. Okay, Again, you might be still scratching your head, thinking, oh, what does this mean? But you've used this before. You've used it in Scratch. If you're in my class, you know, if we've talked about programming before, I've mentioned that Scratch is a really good learning tool for programming. It may look like you're just playing games or creating little animations, but it is programming. Just that you don't have to type out all these lines, okay? Those things have been done for you. But if you've used this before, so when the green flag is clicked, repeat 3 times. Say hello for 2 seconds, wait 5 seconds, and then repeat. That would be a count-controlled loop. It's a for loop, okay? It's repeating 3 times. This one, so it says forever, so it will do this move forever. So forever, move 2 steps. If it's on the edge, it will bounce, okay? So it will do this move, and then if it's on the, so it will move 2 steps, move 2 steps, move 2 steps. It will keep on repeating while that condition is not met. But if it's on the edge, then it will bounce. So, as a summary, iteration means repeating or looping code. A for loop is count controlled and repeats for a set number of times, and a while loop is condition controlled and will repeat until a certain condition is met. Now go and do the worksheet.